Hey everybody, and I hope you can hear me. It looks like you can. Welcome to my live stream discussing the anniversary of what I consider the year of the vampire. So 1979 was a huge deal when it came to vampire films, vampire entertainment, not just movies, but TV shows, books. It was a major year. And I know a lot of people thought that when Twilight came out and you had Vampire Diaries and True Blood, that was a big deal. All that stuff was going on. No, 1979 blew that out of the water. There was so much stuff happening. Horror-wise, on everywhere you went, there were vampires, to the point that Us Magazine did a dual cover of Love at First Bite and Frank Langella's Dracula. That was done by John Badham. And so it's one of those things I about 10 years ago, I wrote a piece for the 20th anniversary of this that was published of that year because it was just such I've never seen, there's never been anything so like it again. 1979 was just a major year. If you were a horror fan, if you loved vampires, it just was everywhere. So I'm going to go through some of the major things that happened that year that you may not realize all just converged in 1979. Now, I was 4 years old. I'm not a young gal, but I was 4 years old that year, and I remember all of this for the most part, because I grew up a horror fan. I've always been a horror fan. If you can't tell from what's going on behind me here, I am a massive horror geek, and it's still I am. So 1979 contributed to a lot of that, as did the films and things that happened that year to me. So here we go. So first off, I need to talk about the feature films, because there were a lot of theatrical films that came out that year that were vampire centric. I've already talked a little bit about that, but the first one I'm going to talk about is one of the most beautiful, surreal remakes that you're ever going to hear about. And that is Nosferatu with Klaus Kinski in the title role. That film came out in 1979, directed by Werner Herzog. It was just a really beautiful film that Kinski he was just a creepy mofo. Isabelle Adjani played Lucy Harker. Again, you're going to notice a theme here where Mina and Lucy kind of flip a lot, and that happens a lot in Dracula films. But this was a redo of Murnau's silent film. Kinski looked creepy as hell. He had a beautiful look to him. It was so what Herzog did. He made everything look very fairy tale, very just otherworldly. Kinski talked, which this was a talkie. And he just had this, they really did a great job with his look. Isabelle Adjani just was ethereally beautiful. So it just was an amazing film. Beautiful. It brought back to people who may not have heard of Nosferatu, the original. But it was really just great film. If you've not seen it, definitely pick it up. It doesn't end the same way as the silent film. Big difference in this one. But the thing that's interesting here to me, Klaus Kinski was just a creepy dude, no matter what movie he was in. To this day, I'm still laughing at the fact that Shelley Duvall chose him to be the Prince and the Beast in her redo of Beauty and the Beast. For Fairy Tale Theater, which, by the way, was based on a complete redo of the French film that was released back in the 30s. I believe it was the 30s. But when he turned into the Prince, he still looked like Klaus Kinski. Anyway, with Susan Sarandon as Beauty. Anyway, but in this film, we're getting off track, which I knew I do when it comes to this stuff, because there's a lot to talk about. But what's interesting here is that Kinski played Renfield in the Franco version of Dracula with Christopher Lee, and he was creepy as hell in that too. But I found that interesting that he went on to play this. There was actually a sequel to Nosferatu, unofficial, called, I believe, Vampire in Venice. Was very sexually charged movie. Had a lot of Kinski doing things with women. It's not kind of an unofficial sequel to this. He doesn't look like he does in this at all. He looks like Klaus Kinski with fangs. I think he has fangs in it. The quality of the film version that I saw was fairly poor. But yeah, there was a weird sequel to Nosferatu with Klaus Kinski playing a vampire. But that year, we got the Nosferatu film that Herzog did. And as I said, it's a really beautiful film, but he's not in this film. They really play to the point that he's very rat-like, which they did in the silent version, but he just doesn't belong. He's not he's beautiful in one way, in how they created his look and everything, but he's not really seductive. He's not sexy. There's no sexy here with this vampire, which is, he's a parasite basically. But he almost is painful within this world to see walking around, like he doesn't belong. There's obviously something he does not belong here. So definitely Nosferatu, Herzog's version, really does a beautiful job with that. And so definitely check that out. So also that year, let's go to the other extreme of vampires and being seductive and sexy. We have Frank Langella in the John Badham version of Dracula, which was based more off of the Broadway play that took over New York. God, everybody played Dracula in this. I've posted on my social media feeds photos of, like, not only Langella really took the role and made it his on the stage, but you had Raul Julia playing Dracula. You had Jeremy Brett playing Dracula. There was just a ton of just great actors that took on the role in the version that is of the play that this film's based on. Now, once again, we have the flip of Mina and Lucy. And weirdly, in this version, Mina is Van Helsing's daughter. And in this is, this was a big budget, big, beautiful version of the story where you had Laurence Olivier playing Van Helsing fantastically. You had Donald Pleasance playing Dr. Seward, who is in this version Lucy's father, and he's always eating. That was a thing that he always wanted him to be eating or something. That was like his nervous tick. Mina is Van Helsing's daughter, as I said. It's just a beautiful film. Kate Nelligan is amazing in this. She plays Lucy, and what I pointed this out a couple days ago because it's actually on HBO on demand right now, and you should definitely check it out, because if you've never seen the Langella Dracula, it is so good. Just absolutely amazing film. Beautifully shot. The music's fantastic. You'll see, I think they actually sample some of the music from this film in other features and things. But it just looks beautiful. And what's interesting about this version of Dracula is it's very feminist. In Lucy's character, she is as strong as any man. She does a lot of things that most men were considered to be the only ones to be able to do at the time that the the story takes place. I really like that take because she's an equal to Dracula in terms of she's just unafraid. And they make a big point about that. She makes a point of saying she wants to be with him of her own accord. She's not under some spell. She's made her choice. And it's just really, there's some subtle things in it. I love how Langella uses his hand in this. Like, it looks like he does a lot of things. It may not even be his hand. It's a really nicely manicured hand, though. Where it kind of looks like a spider when he grasps hold of Mina's hand, when he opens up his coffin. Dracula's home in this, the Carfax Abbey, is just beautiful. The set design is gorgeous. Everything is beautiful in this movie. Except for Mina when she comes back. God, that terrified me as a kid. I was 4, 5 years old when I saw this, and she is not looking great when she's resurrected. But God, Langella just nails this. He is just stunning. His eyes, he doesn't blink in it. His eyes they keep looking around, and like, he just is so good. He doesn't have fangs. That's a big thing in this. Dracula doesn't have fangs in this film. He's very humanistic in that way. But there is biting. There's, of course, that whole, like, weirdly lava-like red love scene between him and Lucy. That is very stylistic. But I love the ending of this because they make it very, what do you think is happening, in your own mind? Do you think Dracula got away? It's obvious that Lucy's smiling, that he may have escaped. So it's a neat ending. Dracula kind of gets the girl. So Badham's version is very beautiful. It's different. One little thing that you may not know, for Doctor Who fans out there, is that Sylvester McCoy, the 7th Doctor, is in this. And apparently he also performed in one of the stage plays versions of it. But he is in it as kind of like a butler for Dr. Seward's family. So keep an eye out for him. He has a couple of lines in it. You'll see him, you'll notice him. But yeah, I absolutely loved this version of Dracula, and it's one of my favorites. And actually, Scream Factory is releasing a 30th anniversary edition of it with a exclusive poster that's coming out, I believe, this month. And you can check that out. It's got some extras on there as well. I actually have another version of it on Blu-ray, but I'm getting this one because there's extras, and it's got a really beautiful artwork that they're releasing along with it. So check that out. Dr. Seward in this and Van Helsing are fantastic. I love Donald Pleasence. I love Laurence Olivier. It's just a great film. You'll notice, as I said, there's missing parts. There's no Arthur Holmwood. There's no Quincy Morris. So just be aware it's different, and it's based off the stage play, which cuts out some of the characters. Another major release that happened that year in the Dracula vein is Love at First Bite. And I love at First Bite. The irony is not lost on me that you have one of the tannest guys around, Mr. George Hamilton, playing Dracula, which is hilarious in its own right. But Love at First Bite is an interesting film. I actually wrote a piece about this in a book about vampire movies. It's got a lot, just there's so many cameos, like the Sherman Hemsley's in there, Isabel Sanford's in it, Michael Pataki is in there, who you probably recognize from a couple of other films, including Dracula's Dog, which he played Dracula in, funnily enough. But Artie Johnson's in this as Renfield. He does a fantastic kind of impression of Dwight Fry in this, which is fantastic. Yeah, just I love at First Bite. I am not. This is one of the first things I think I saw Dracula in that I remember as a kid. You've got Susan St. James, who looks fantastic in this as well. But as I said, George Hamilton, he just is so great. And Richard Benjamin is also in this, who you may know from Saturday the 14th. But, and also Westworld, Quark. He's been in a ton of things. And he's amazing as well. But Hamilton, he manages to create this version of Dracula that is romantic, and even though there's all this comedy, he's a romantic and sympathetic. Love at First Bite is interesting because it came out at the tail end of the disco movement in the 70s, where there was a lot of crap going on. People were going to therapy. People were trying to live their best lives, kind of a thing. And within this movie, you've got a character like Cindy, played by Susan St. James, who is trapped in this materialistic world. She's a model. She's being pressured to, be a modern woman and all this stuff. And she kind of doesn't want that. And here you have Dracula sweep her off her feet, be all courtly and old school, and she is smitten. And it's kind of an interesting take on the whole genre, and also women at that time, being treated like they're important and being treated well. It's a really interesting take on the story. And I love just the comedy, and it's great. I love the fish out of water stuff. But I really just love George Hamilton's portrayal of Dracula, as cheesy as it can come off. I loved how he just kept it so perfect, and this mix of cheese and serious and winking at the camera kind of a thing. I really love at First Bite. Again, this is really, they released a copy of this on Blu-ray through Shout and Scream Factory, and it was a double feature with Once Bitten, which came out in the 80s with Jim Carrey and Lauren Hutton. Not as good a comedy. It's good, but it's not as good a comedy as Love at First Bite. I don't know, man. I probably, because it's one of the first things, like I said, I saw with Dracula in it. I still love this movie. The music is fantastic. What's interesting is there was a big controversy because the I Love the Nightlife song, they played it in the TV version, but when you got it on video, like VHS, they changed the song for the dance number, which is one of the coolest parts of it. Yeah, that was, I remember being very angry one time because I think I bought it on tape or something, and the song wasn't there, and that was a big deal for me, and I was very angry. But interestingly enough, George Hamilton keeps saying that there is going to be a sequel. He's been trying to get that made, and it would be, I guess, the son of Dracula and Cindy. So we'll see if that ever happens. I hope it does, because I kind of want to see him back as Dracula, and he still looks amazing, definitely. So we'll see if it happens. I would love to see another version. I mean, a sequel to this too. So another feature that came out the same year of 1979 was Thirst. This is an Australian film that had David Hemmings in it, and it was a very weird, different take on the vampire myth. It was sort of like a cult story of blood drinkers who they're aristocratic blood drinkers who want to only drink the blood of other aristocrats. It's a weird Australian movie, and I'm sure you've heard some things about it. If you've watched the documentary, Not Quite Hollywood, they talk about it on there. They're out to get the character of Kate to be a member of their group and give in to her bloodlust because they're born as vampires. It's a different movie. It's hard to find. I think you can find it maybe on YouTube. I know that they did just they've released versions of it. I'm trying to remember the company that did so. But you can find it on DVD. It's a different movie though, because you got to be prepared for Australian films to be a little different. They have like their familiars are in there that they're walking around kind of like zombies. So it's a different take on the vampire genre, which is always good. I like seeing things like that, and they kind of work in a little bit of the Elizabeth Bathory story in there as well with these characters. So to move on to some of the lesser known, less talked about under hushed tones kind of films. There was, of course, your porn ripoffs that happened that year, and there were two actually that happened in 1979. Two of the more well-known Dracula ones, actually. Dracula Blows His Cool is really just a movie, like a slapsticky kind of almost Benny Hill type of thing, where the Count has all these naked women running around that this photographer comes to Castle Dracula to take photographs of these quote unquote models. And there's some disco music involved, and basically Dracula is overwhelmed by the amount of women. So yeah, it's that's just Dracula Blows His Cool. There's much more to it than that. The other one was Dracula Sucks. Dracula Sucks is a little bit more of a more high-end porn. You've got John Holmes in it. There's an actor named Jamie Gillis. He plays Dracula in this. He actually plays him in another porn movie called Dracula Exotica, which also was named Love at First Gulp. But yeah, but John Holmes is John Stoker. And then it's basically, a ripoff of Dracula. There's a lot of dialogue that's taken from Universal's Bela Lugosi Dracula. So yeah, it's there's not much more to say about those. They didn't really try very hard. But they didn't try Jessica, no. Let's talk about TV. TV was hopping with vampires that year, and one of the biggest and most important to happen was Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot came out in 1979, and it was a major deal on network television. Not only because it's one of the scariest vampire films ever, but it was made for TV, and Tobe Hooper just nailed it with this. It was horrifying. And I remember distinctly being terrified about that. Everybody talks about this, but I'm going to say it. That little frickin' kid, let me in, Danny, let me in. And I remember I actually did draw crosses. My mom let me watch shit that I should never have watched as a kid. But I remember distinctly drawing crosses on my neck with a pen, which probably could have given me ink poisoning, because I saw that at that age, and I saw that little kid, and I didn't want that kid coming in and killing me. Salem's Lot was a major deal. Barlow was horrifying. It was again another return to the Nosferatu look for a vampire. It's a big deal because James Mason was in this. David Soul was in it. It had some just fantastic actors, and it was a miniseries, and it was one of the first Stephen King miniseries to hit network TV, which would lead the charge of all of these that came after, like The Langoliers, The Stand. But the Salem's Lot was the first to do it. It just was just still good. It still holds up, I think. Just the music that's in there, Hooper just nailed it. He really did a fantastic job with this, and I'm amazed at, there's just the things that are in this for a network TV movie. My brain may have made them worse than they really were, but it's just terrifying. It's just literally terrifying to watch. The way the vampires looked, Barlow himself, I love Salem's Lot. It's so good and so scary and still one of my favorites. Again, this is another one that Shout Factory and Scream Factory have released on Blu-ray that you can get. Pick it up, watch it again. It is perfect for Halloween viewing. It's still terrifying. Man, you can't beat the vampires in that. They look sick. They look infected. They look, that was the whole thing. This was Stephen King basically talking about Dracula coming to the modern world and going along that whole route of Nosferatu, where you have, it's an infection. And it's also talks about the compare, how evil, can something be evil, and how, the Marston house was this evil kind of magnet. And that's why Barlow and Straker pick that house and that town. Of course, now Stephen King's universe, they're really pushing the whole connectivity of everything. So they're kind of doing a return to this in the new season of Castle Rock. Jerusalem's Lot, Salem's Lot is part of the new season. It's going to be starting this month. But Salem's Lot, you'll see it. They mention it in a bunch of other things as well, because everything's connected now in Stephen King's universe, because they kind of always were. But now they're really going for that connectivity. And so check out Salem's Lot. I know that the Rob Lowe version that came about 10 or so years ago was more like the book, I guess. And it was. But there's just something that Tobe Hooper did that's so perfect with this version of it. I absolutely love it. And if you haven't seen Salem's Lot, the original 1979, watch it. Be prepared, because the makeup still stands up. The acting still stands up. It's still a fantastic, fantastic show. So that same year, as we continue on to the television track, there was a made-for-TV movie on ABC that aired in October of 1979 called simply Vampire. And in that, you had Richard Lynch playing the vampire of the role. His name is Anton Wojtek, which is a great name. Also in this was Jason Miller, who was just coming off of his turn in The Exorcist as Father Karras. E.G. Marshall is in this as well. And it was actually, from everything I've seen, it was actually supposed to be a pilot for a TV series that followed Jason Miller and E.G. Marshall's characters as they hunted down the vampire, because actually he gets away in the end of this, and so it leaves it open. And it was actually co-written by Stephen Bochco, as a little bit of trivia there. So the guy who would write Law and Order and a bunch of other shows. but I really loved Vampire. It was another one of those very adult centric, really well done, made for TV movies that ABC used to do. And this one just, Richard Lynch was just, he just was very, very good in this. He's beautiful in this. He has that flowing blonde hair. And I remember thinking how interesting it was. It was like when the first blonde vampires, because typically they were very dark, they made him look very angelic. And also, I think it was supposed to hint towards him being possibly Nazi in this, because they made him very blonde, Aryan looking. And they mentioned at some point that he has stolen artifacts and stolen treasures that were part of Nazi gold hauls at one point and they mention it very briefly. But it's just a really great movie. It's tragic, it's scary. He's just a great vampire. I would have really have loved to have seen a series based on this. I don't know how long you could have ran with it, but it was just a really neat concept. And Lynch just nails it. He's seductive and suave, but then he can turn on a dime and just be vicious. So I really, really loved it. It's definitely late 70s. There's some disco in there a little bit, but I really just, I like the whole, you had some really grade A actors in there. Jason Miller's just fantastic. And E.G. Marshall was great too. There's like little nuggets of information that they give you of the past because basically what happens is, the Rollinses, their husband and wife architects, are building a new building at this part of, I believe it takes place in Chicago. And when they're digging up the dirt for the building, they unearth the vampire. He gets released from where he was been trapped, and he digs himself out. There's this great scene where he pulls himself out of the dirt. And so he asked them to help him after he gets himself, prettified and cleaned up. And he asked them to help him find his treasures. And then basically what happens is they've discovered that the treasures are all stolen. That's where the Nazi thing comes in. And he's betrayed. He gets put in prison. He gets out. And then he decides to take his revenge on the architects. And he kills Leslie, John's wife, and he finds her there, and this whole thing, he goes crazy, decides to try to kill himself, doesn't work out. And so there's your plot of the chase of Anton Wojtek, and how they could have made a series out of it, which would have been interesting, and I would have liked it, but no. And once again, I saw this way too young. I was 4, and I remember watching it. It explains so much, doesn't it? It does. So this one is interesting because this is one I have yet to see, but this happened back in the day. Showtime, the cable network, used to do these versions of stage plays that they would record on video and show as films. And there was a showing in 1979 that they did that has never been released on DVD or VHS, called The Passion of Dracula. There's pictures that you can find of this. But once again, this was a stage play, and you'll never find it anywhere. I've yet to find this anywhere. This one, again, they switch up the characters again. You've got Lord Godalming, which is Arthur Holmwood, is a friend of Van Helsing. Mina is a niece of Dr. Seward's. So basically, the plot that I've compiled together of this is Dracula just basically wants to start up his brides again. And it was done by Showtime Theater Productions, and I've yet to find it. This is one of my holy grails. I want to see this. I've only seen pictures of it. But it was done and based off of a stage play. So, like I said, if you can find The Passion of Dracula, send it to me, please. I'll pay you. I want to see this. It's one of my holy grails. I managed to get that Dark Shadows pilot unaired thing. I want this. So, the other thing that was on TV at the time, which I freaking loved and never missed, was Cliffhangers. Cliffhangers was a really neat concept by Kenneth Johnson, who the guy that made V, he made The Incredible Hulk, he did The Bionic Woman. Cliffhangers was based around the concept of the old school cliffhangers. It had 3 separate stories that every week you'd get a new chapter to. There was one called Stop Susan Williams, which was sort of like a murder mystery, woman in danger. Then there was the blanking on I think it was like the Underground Empire, the Underground Kingdom, something like that, about a cowboy who is brought to this underground, never known kingdom before with it's like a sci-fi fantasy. But the one that I loved, and the only one they actually finished, was the Curse of Dracula, or the World of Dracula. It was Michael Nouri, who you may remember from The Hidden or possibly Flashdance, as Dracula. He played a fantastic Dracula who was very hip, and he drove like a blood red Ferrari. He had 2 Dobermans, Othello and they were named after Shakespearean characters. But he had his hip young college student victims that were his minions, and he was being chased by Van Helsing's great grandson, who was being helped by another woman whose mother was The Secret Empire. That was the name of it. Sorry. But Mary, who helps Kurt Van Helsing, her mother was a victim of Dracula's. And so what ends up happening is, of course, Dracula seduces her. Every week there's a cliffhanger, if you will, where you don't know if they're going to get away. What's interesting, as I said, is that the Dracula one is the only one they've bothered to finish, because it was the most popular, and it was just a really cool, neat modern telling of Dracula, following him around. Nouri just was great, because he made him sympathetic, but he was also vicious, and he was very sexually charged. And I mean, damn, man, he got the mom and he got the daughter. Come on. So it just was a really fantastic concept. I wish it had kept going. It didn't. It lasted for a season. It was on NBC. It's one of those things. What's interesting is, like, 20 years later, they edited it. They actually, at the time, they edited and cut them into 2-hour long movies. The World of Dracula, they cut, or The Loves of Dracula. You find it. They actually, I remember about, I think it was like 20 years after or so, like maybe 15, they actually aired that on syndication, the 2-hour version of it, but they cut out a ton of stuff and they leave it on a cliffhanger. The edited movie doesn't show you the ending of what actually happens in the series, which they wrapped up. I don't get it. Anyway, you will not find this officially released. I wish Universal would release it, because NBC Universal still owns the rights to this, I believe. I found really horrible bootleg copies of it that I paid money for because it was the only way to get it. Based off of somebody who had a VHS recorder at the time this happened, and they recorded it. And they're horrible copies. They look like poop, but it is the only way to see it. I wish NBC Universal would release a set of the episodes. Come on, people would buy it. I would buy it. Come on. I know people would love to see this. It was an interesting, neat idea, and I would like to see it. Clean copy of it so I can look at Michael Nuri and be happy. That same year, here we go again. This is kind of the kids section now. That year, again, with the Disco and Dracula, we had the Halloween That Almost Wasn't, which was also released as The Night Dracula Saved the World. If you're a kid my age, you saw this and loved it. Mariette Hartley was the witch. Judd Hirsch was Dracula. You had Henry Gibson as Igor. Basically, the witch wants her due as being an equal to Dracula and the rest of the monsters, because Halloween doesn't officially really happen unless she rides her broom over the moon, or in front of the moon. And so she holds herself hostage, and the monsters all try to get at her, and she beats them. And eventually her and Dracula disco dance, and that's like the coolest thing ever. So I love this. You can find it on YouTube. It's so great. It's so fun. It's done in, it's done in such a way that it's perfect. It's not gonna age, because even though, disco, I don't care. I loved it. It's fantastic. And Judd Hirsch is a cute Dracula. That same year, again, Bunnicula happened. Bunnicula was an ABC weekend special based off the books that are still going. And all of this happened in 1 year. Just heads up. That's the same year that the book came out. James Howe released Bunnicula, but they did the cartoon. So go look on YouTube. You'll find the cartoon of Bunnicula. You should check it out. Same year, there was a book series. We're going to go into books now, because Dracula and vampires were everywhere in this year. So if you haven't read the Fred Saberhagen books, the Dracula series that he did, you should be doing that. Old Friend of the Family is part of this series that he started. It's a little bit cheating, but Old Friend of the Family is when Dracula becomes modern in his books. This was the third entry in a series that Saberhagen did that started with the Dracula tapes. Dracula was actually the hero. He was the misunderstood. It's super, super amazing. In the second book, he meets up with Sherlock Holmes. They're fantastic books, and you should check them out. I would hope at some point, someday, it would be really cool to have a movie version of these, because they're just brilliant and funny and interesting and good. They're a great retelling, and they are custom made to be a series, because I think he ended up doing 10 books, and you can definitely, there's like a ton of material there, and you can hop from the past to the present. Do it, HBO. Do it. That same year, again, Tomb of Dracula, which was the Marvel Comics comic. The actual comic ended in 1979, but they started a magazine-sized run that year of black and white comics. They're big magazine-sized versions of them, and that happened that year. Now, they only did, they ended up being 6 issues of that, but they were great. They were awesome, modern. Some of them were modern, some of them were in the past books, and they actually also included articles about things like Nosferatu, Frank Langella's Dracula, and Love at First Bite might have been in them. They really did push the Dracula with Frank Langella in those, and the Nosferatu movie. So Marvel released that year, which is, again, why I hope, come on, baby, where they're going with the new Doctor Strange film, they're going to the horror realm with it. Come on, give me my Dracula, man. Give me my Dracula in my Marvel universe, cinematic universe. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, he's already said he wants to do it. Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Dracula. With that has been my walk through the memory lane of 1979, the actual for real year of the vampire. If what I just listed off isn't proof enough for you, I don't know what to say. All of that happened in 1 year. You had various versions of Dracula. You had major releases in the book world. You had TV everywhere. Dracula was there. And vampires were there. I don't know what more you could want. It's the 30th anniversary of all of this. So with that, I hope you guys check out some of this stuff. As I said, Shout and Scream Factory have quite a number of these available. Go find them. Go find stuff on YouTube. Go look at some of the trailers. And if you have any questions or anything, comments, things you think I might have missed, or things that you want to hear me talk about again, please comment below and let me know. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you again later. Happy Halloween. I'll get you some more stuff here this month, maybe. We'll see. Let me know what you want to hear about. And I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.